welcome everybody to our official XBRL outreach today. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you in the boardroom as well as online. Yeah, we have still a few seconds to go. We should start just on time. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. My name is Richard Bössen. I'm responsible for the digital XBRL taxonomies at IFRAG. I'm an XBRL expert, and yeah, I'm especially responsible for the ESRS XBRL taxonomy, which is a pleasure to present you today the draft version, the exposure draft, actually. And also, it's a pleasure to have very special guests today that will have will provide first an introduction from Patrick de Combourg, but later even a panel discussion. And yeah, everybody feel free, feel welcomed actually in the office as well as online. And I would like to hand over to Patrick de Combourg, the chair of the IFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board, to start with a quick introduction to our outreach event. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you, Richard, and good afternoon to all. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this outreach event. I understand that I see the boardroom with attendance in person, so thank you for coming. And but I also know that we have about 1,500 registered attendees online. So and for good reasons, because digital tagging is a critical step to make sure that the information that will be prepared under ESRS is available for all in a very efficient manner. So yes, we've been asked by the Commission not only to elaborate the draft standards which have been adopted by the Commission on July 31st, but also to prepare the tagging that corresponds to so the digital taxonomy that corresponds to the ESRS that are in human readable format. It is critical because there, of course, just a quick maybe reminder on how we proceed. So we have worked for more than a year to elaborate an exposure draft, which is submitted to you in accordance with our due process, which requires public consultation. So we expect many responses and and a lot of input that could improve what we have drafted. Then we will finalize this and we will deliver this as a technical advice to the European Commission and to basically ESMA, which is the organization responsible for operating the European Single Access Point. So there are steps after the one we are discussing today, but this initial step is highly important in our view. Why? Because standard setters tend sometimes to focus on principles, on content, and are taking a human readable approach to information. So yes, they see that it's readable, it's fine, okay. But we all know that in fact, the consumption of corporate reporting information is in the vast majority of cases under a digital format. So when we developed our preparatory work at the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021, we said digital should be embedded into what we do from day one. In order to avoid what has happened, and for good reasons, this is not a criticism, with financial reporting, whereby, of course, human readable reports were prepared for for many years when the digital translation of those reports had to take place. And of course, it is difficult to do it afterwards. So we all wanted to learn from the lessons of the financial reporting digital taxonomy exercise. And so we made a huge effort to make sure that whatever we would be doing could be transformed into a digital version. So we focused on presentation because sometimes, again, under a principles approach, you have a look at content and you are satisfied at a high level, but then you miss the presentation point and the access to information point. So I would like to mention in parentheses that in the EU and as compared to other initiatives, even in human readable format, there is a clear picture because we will regroup all information deriving from ESRS into one document, which is the sustainability statement, which is a separate chapter of the management report. So in fact, you have the financial statements and you have the sustainability statement as a second pillar of standardized corporate reporting. And this was key for us. And very fortunately, the CSRD has totally adopted this vision, and we have translated it into the ESRS in terms of human readable presentation. Now, what is important is to note that sustainability reporting, by contrast with financial reporting, includes a lot of narrative information which has an autonomous value in terms of decision usefulness. In financial reporting, narrative information is mostly related to figures, to explain the context, to explain the meaning of the figures or the connections of the figures between themselves, but they have less of an autonomous value. So they support the understanding of figures. In sustainability reporting, narrative information has a different role and therefore a different value. It has a value per se. So we focused from day one on how we should draft the standards in order to facilitate the digital taxonomy, digital taxonomy and the digitization when time would come. And that's why, you know, for figures, because there is quantitative information. This is very similar to what can be done in terms of best practices to very similar to financial reporting, but on narrative information, we dedicated a special attention to that. And so that's why we have structured narrative information in a way that is, you know, with detailed data points, which we have presented under what we call in our little language, A, B, C, D. So, you know, the information shall include A, B, C, D, and sometimes 1 Roman, 2 Roman, 3 Roman below A or B, or both. So the mandate that has been given to the team led by Richard has been, please do not aggregate or disaggregate information, because that would be standard setting through the back door. And we feel maybe we made mistakes in the human readable format. You can assume that sometimes you could have aggregated some or disaggregated some, but it was seriously considered. So at this stage, and this is something that we wish to we want to have the reactions through the public consultation about that. We decided to adopt exactly the same granularity as the one that has been embedded into the standards, in order not to create a standard setting through the back door for the digital access to information. Our criteria, our key criterion, the umbrella criterion for determining this is decision usefulness. So we believe that users, when they have a look at information, if it's aggregated too much, then the only way forward is artificial intelligence, possibly. But if we are precise, then people can access a granular information of interest to them on which they will base their products or their judgments, and they will exercise their judgment on precise information. So for us, the relationship between the standards, the digital taxonomy, under the umbrella of decision usefulness for everybody, for stakeholders, users of information, is absolutely key. And that's a point on which all participants, attendees, may have a view, and we would welcome your input on that in particular to make sure that we are heading in the right direction. It may seem a little bit burdensome for preparers, because sometimes, there is a preparers tend to say, okay, it's a bit like a PDF format, boom, I put that on the website and that's it. But then, is it usable for decisions? So is it digitally decision useful? This is a key question. So for me, this outreach event is a key moment for us to explain and for you to react. So thank you very much for your attendance, and have a great outreach meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That was a very interesting speech, and we will definitely take that chance and present our taxonomy. And I'm also curious on all the comments and questions we might get during the outreach. Thank you, Patrick. Good. So let's start with the presentation. Our agenda looks like this, that we have first an overview of the ESRS XBRL taxonomy, the digital taxonomy itself, including a few highlights from our explanatory note. And this, we will summarize the survey. And during the presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions via Slido. I will show you the link in a few seconds. And please feel free to do so. We cannot promise to answer all the questions, but of course, we do our best. And also the ones in the boardroom, the participants in the boardroom, please feel free to use your mobile or your computer to access the Slido. And in the end, we need to see how we moderate between questions in the room and in the Slido. But yeah, I'm sure we will manage it. Good. And then at the very end, I'm very honored to have Stefan Schnell today, and John Turner and Marc Collier and Chiara on a panel. And we will also discuss the aspects that we are going to have here in the presentation. Good. So let's start with the presentation. This is the Slido link. So if you have a mobile phone, please scan the QR code or use the code that you can see here on the screen to access it on slido.com, and feel free to ask questions. We will also have a number of polls during the presentation, so stay tuned. It's nothing to relax today. It's we really would like to have your engagement during this outreach. Good. In order to just get started with the first interaction with you, for us, it would be interesting to see what kind of stakeholders are you representing? Which persons do we have in the room or online? Please respond to the Slido by using the code or using the QR code. I give everybody another 10 seconds. That's interesting. We have consultants, software vendors, but also preparers. That is, of course, good. Perfect. Yeah, that gives an impression of the audience that we have today. But I can see that we have only 27 people participating in the Slido so far. Maybe some of you still need to get the access to the Slido. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Let us start with the presentation on the XBRL taxonomy itself. So first of all, IFRAC, under the mandate of the European Commission, developed the ESRX taxonomy, which will be part of the ESEF RTS, just to summarize. And it's a digital transposition of the human readable ESRS. And just not to confuse both terms, taxonomy is also being used in another way for the EU taxonomy, but this is something different, right? Yeah, just don't confuse this one. We are talking about the digital taxonomy. And the taxonomy can in the end be used, of course, by the preparers to structure their statements and to digitally tag it. And then the digital data sets can be used by the users. And we will demonstrate the whole process today. Traditionally, it was always Andrea's job. Andrea is working with me together with me on the project to introduce you to the legal background of the ESRS digital taxonomy. So, Andrea, please introduce yourself and make a quick presentation on the legal background.
Thanks, Richard, and good afternoon to all of you. My name is Andrea Giannini, and I joined IFRAC more than 2 years ago, and I was mainly involved in the drafting of the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. Working so in parallel with Richard on the project of digitalization. I am not an XBRL expert, but of course I supported Richard more on the human readable side, focusing on the correct transposition of the architecture with ESRS set 1 into the data model of the current XBRL taxonomy. So if we move to the next slides, I will briefly introduce the CSRD, just say 2 words that represent, of course, the current legal framework under which IFRAC operates and under which IFRAC, of course, releases technical advice to the European Commission. So CSRD were adopted in December 2022 with the main objective to create a common reporting framework and common standards in the European Union for the sustainability reporting. So the sustainability reporting will be prepared according to the ESRS that were recently incorporated into the delegated act. And the sustainability statement are to be reported in a clearly identifiable section of the management report, along with the Article 8 of the taxonomy, that is a different taxonomy. About the scope of the application, CSRD has a broader scope than NFRD, so the previous directive that is now of course, is a current framework. All large undertakings will exceed some criteria. For instance, with more than 250 employees are in scope of the CSRD with a progressive phase-in. So we start from the fiscal year 2024 with a large listed companies and a large listed group. Then from 2025 with large undertakings and large groups, in 2026 with the listed SME, and finally in 2028 with the non-EU countries. So as you can see in the green box below, we are going to present now the draft XBRL taxonomy that reflects the set 1 of ESRS applicable to large undertakings and large groups. Moving to the next slides. Okay, here ESRS were adopted in July 2023 by the European Commission and published in the official journal in December 2023, so 3 months ago. There is some technical issue with the slides, Richard. Okay. So in these slides, you can see there is a composition of the ESRS that are articulated into 2 cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1 and ESRS 2. and 10 topical standards which cover sustainability matters in the environment, social, and governance. We have 82 disclosure requirements across all these standards and more than 1,000 data points in all SRS. Of course, data points that are mainly subject to the material assessment. ESRS 1 contains general requirements and not included any disclosure requirement. Nevertheless, we have also considered some requirements in ESRS 1 and we have transposed into specific elements in the XBRL format. About the next slides, so the CSRD has not only introduced a new common framework for the preparation of the sustainability reporting, but it has included the new provision in the accounting directive, the Article 29D, about the machine-readable format. So large listed undertakings and large group shall prepare the management report in the XHTML format and mark up the sustainability reporting, including the Article 8 disclosures of the EU taxonomy in accordance with the ESEF format. So based on this provision, ESEF regulation will be amended in order to incorporate the electronic format for the management report and the XBRL format for the sustainability report. So just to clarify that ESEF regulation already requires the XBRL format for the financial statement of the issuers. So this slide covers a little bit the legal background, and of course that we need to wait before the XBRL taxonomy will be incorporated into the delegated act by the European Commission. So Richard, if you can, thanks. You can continue with the slide.
Thank you, Andrea. I just heard that we have some issues with the live stream. Obviously, the slides are not being, the screen is not being showed in the live stream. So I don't know. It seems that the participants only see the cameras in the boardroom, but not my screen. Let me maybe try to share my screen again. But I'm sharing the screen. So if you can please have a look, Ovidu or Diana, that would be great. Anyway, let's continue then with a quick Slido. I hope that people can still participate in the Slido from outside. The Slido ID is 2500945, and I repeat 2500945. And yeah, maybe it works now, hopefully, with a live stream. We just wanted to have an indication here how familiar you are with the XBRL technology. And I think this is quite similar to the results we are seeing on the screen, to the event we had last time a few weeks ago in a workshop. That is, of course, quite good that we have a few experts in the room, but we will definitely make sure that we introduce you to the XBRL technology in a way that you can understand it. This is our highest goal. So it's of course an honor to have launched the public consultation on the draft ESRS XBRL taxonomy, which is open till 8th of April. So you still have the chance to respond. But of course we are reaching the end, and I'm very curious what kind of responses we will have. IFRAC has not only published the consultation for the ESRS taxonomy, but also on the Article 8 disclosure taxonomy, because we had been tasked to develop a digital version of the Article 8 as well, but it's a separate consultation, so we are not presenting it today. We have also provided an explanatory note and basis for conclusion document that includes illustrations of application instructions. And this, of course, a very important document in order to understand the decisions we have been taken and the details we have implemented, actually. And then additionally, we provided 2 non-authoritative accompanying documents. First of all, the XBRL taxonomy itself illustrated in Excel, and I will explain why this is important, and illustrative examples of tagged ESRS reports. And yeah, all of the materials are available on the IFRAC webpage. If for those of you that have never seen a digital taxonomy, first of all, you need to know that the digital taxonomy can usually only be used by a certain software, right? You need to use a certain compliant XBRL software in order to use a digital taxonomy. Here on the screen on the left is a free open source tool. It's called IRL, and this one can be used to browse the ESRS taxonomy, as we can see here on the left side. It comes with a tree structure, so as soon as the XBRL taxonomy is opened, you have a tree structure on the right with all the different disclosure requirements. Here you can see, hopefully, if it's not too small, the E3 for water consumption, and then below all the different data points for the water consumption, including, for instance, additional disaggregations. In order to allow people to look at the taxonomy without having such a tool, because maybe not everybody has it available, we also provided an illustration of the taxonomy in Excel, which is here on the screenshot on the right. And it's basically the same tree that we have in the Excel file, where you can, for instance, filter in column B for the disclosure requirement. But it's, of course, not the official taxonomy. It's just an illustration, right? And then additionally, we provided a set of illustrative examples of tagged ESRS XBRL reports. Those reports are not real ESRS reports, but rather mock-up versions. So what we did is actually we tested our own taxonomy by creating small snippets of the disclosures and putting some random numbers and random text, nonsense text actually, into a document and then digitally tagged in order to making sure that it works like as expected. And we think that this is also helpful not only for preparers, but also for users of the data, because they can see how a digital disclosure might look like and how it is potentially being structured. In order maybe to show you how it looks like in real life, because on the screenshot it's not really very useful, I just share my screen here in a web browser. So what I just opened is one of the illustrative examples. And when you scroll down, you can see the different texts and disclosures that are part of this report. The magic with XBRL is that when you click on a certain number or on a certain text, that you can see what the tagging actually is for this specific narrative disclosure or for the numerical value, like the greenhouse gas emissions here. This is done because, or this can be done because I have a viewer software here that is able to extract the tagging information from that human readable inline XBRL document. Yeah. Just very quickly for those that have never seen such a report, but this is how companies are supposed to provide their ESRS sustainability statement soon. Good. In regard to the timeline, we had many questions in the past on the timeline itself, because what is actually happening after we have provided the final XBRL taxonomy is quite interesting. So our process is, of course, that we will end the public consultation, we will review the responses and probably implement some changes to the taxonomy, and then publish, first approve, of course, by the board and by the tag, the final taxonomy, and then publish it in, I hope, July, August. So we call it Q3, but during the summer. This is our plan. And then we will hand it over to ESMA and to the European Commission. And as Andrea pointed out, it's their responsibility to take that digital taxonomy and embed it into the ESEF RTS. So the ESEF RTS needs to be amended in order to mandate the companies to do the digital tagging in their sustainability statements. This process, according to what ESMA and the European Commission have communicated to us, will take about 1 year. So the amendment of the ESEF RTS, which is likely to be done then by mid-2025. And that basically means, and please don't take this for granted what I'm saying now, because I'm not representing ESMA or the European Commission here, but it basically means that there is no tagging requirement for the financial report 2024, but rather for the following financial year periods. It has not been officially formally communicated yet, but I think we can take that for granted. Good. Yeah, just one question on the consultation documents and all the materials that you saw. Hopefully, I hope now that the people in the live stream can also see my screen. How useful did you find the documents that we have provided? Yeah, that would be quite interesting. But of course, it seems to be biased because we still have only the number of participants that equals the number of the participants in the room, I guess. So probably the live stream is still not working well. But I'm happy that you in the boardroom definitely like our materials. Thank you so much. Good. Let's have a look at the taxonomy itself. Andrea, do you want to kick off with the transposition?
Yes, of course. So these slides show an example of the digital transposition of a disclosure requirement into the XBRL taxonomy. So the left side illustrates the human readables version of the ESRS, in particular the disclosure requirement of ESRS2 SBN1. The right side presents the data modeling of this disclosure requirement and how the detailed requirements or data points have been transposed into separate elements of the taxonomy, including the related data type classification. So for the narrative disclosures, we have identified different levels of granularity of data under level 1, 2, and 3. The maximum granularity of the narrative disclosures corresponds at the level of sub-clauses of the disclosure requirement under the orange color, and they've been associated with the level 3 of the human readable disclosure requirement. In addition, the table shows the implementation of SAR requirements transposed in a format of table and numerical elements, including also Boolean elements. And here you can see that we have implemented in this way all the corresponding data points that you can see under the ESRS2 SBN1. I don't know, Richard, if you want to say something about the structure of the narrative disclosures and whatever the categorical elements, but I think that we can cover during our presentation.
Yes, we will cover that a little bit later. Just a quick information. Obviously, we have some issue with our streaming tool. I don't know why it's not working, but we are trying as much as possible to get it running with the provider of that streaming tool. Yeah, I hope really it will work. If not, we have to see how we deal with this because it seems that the people in the live stream can't see the screen. Anyway, let's continue and hope for the best. And yeah, otherwise we will definitely provide the recording or maybe even repeat the outreach. Let's see. Good. No, I have nothing to add on this. Of course, this is just this slide is just an illustration of the translation process, right? We did this, of course, very carefully with all the ESRS text and read each and every paragraph and translated it. But of course, it is of only a small snippet that we are showing here. Yeah, let's go to the next Slido poll question. The ESRS defines detailed disclosure requirements. Do you agree that the ESRS XBRL taxonomy should exactly reflect the data points within the disclosure requirements and neither omit nor add data points? I'm actually quite interesting. We have at least a few that are hitting no, but the majority says that the digital taxonomy should reflect the ESRS text itself. That is, of course, or that has been our highest goal during the development of the taxonomy. We have also covered this question in our survey, of course, or a similar question. It's the key question actually that we have in our consultation, which is, do you agree that the digital ESRS taxonomy adequately represents the ESRS disclosure requirements, right? So this is a key question, and we hope that, yeah, we will get a number of positive responses on this, yeah, because we have been working with a methodology that has been approved by the board quite a lot. And of course, the highest goal, this is the question number 2, is in the end also to serve the user needs, right? So the data analysts, the providers, financial institution, they all need to have that digital data. So we also considered their need. Well, let's have a look at the narrative tagging hierarchy. The narrative taggings are a little bit special because if you have noticed probably, the IROs taxonomy comes with a tree structure that is reflecting the individual data points like Patrick de Combourg pointed out in each paragraph, like this one in SBM3. SBM1, this is a disclosure requirement, IROs 2, SBM1, where we have, for instance, a paragraph 40, which requires a description of the market position and strategy, and then 40A, and Romanin 1, Romanin 2, Romanin, and so on. And of course, this narrative tagging hierarchy means that we have not only the most granular narrative and data points, but also the parents of those, which are in this case, for instance, the yellow paragraph 40. And when you look at the human readable report, that often means that the parent could actually just be a conjunction of the children, right? When you look at the text that is written on the left side on the screen, then the value or the text of the tag that is reflecting the paragraph 40 is in summary basically all the content that we have below. However, there is one aspect that makes it a little bit more complex. The question is about the entity-specific or additionals not separately identified or not being part of the IROs disclosure requirements disclosures, as we have pointed out here with a slightly green color. So imagine if there is an entity-specific addition to a data point, then of course the question is, how is it actually being tagged if it's not being tagged with a granular tag? And then the parents could, for instance, be used to tag this one. Our assumption is that as soon as all the granular content is tagged with a granular text block tag, actually, that it's not needed to tag the parents as well, unless there is such an additional disclosure or entity-specific disclosures that might be tagged. We also made sure that we have a specific other, I call it other disclosure or other material information tag in our taxonomy that can be used for that purpose, together with a specific mechanism. Yeah, but this was definitely something that we considered and where you can find more information in our explanatory note on how we have implemented that. Here is a question now for the Slido. Do you think that the tagging of granular narrative disclosures is more useful than tagging of broader, larger text blocks, potentially covering multiple pages? This is also very interesting. It seems many agree actually to that question. And I think also from a user perspective, it makes definitely sense, but we will also discuss this a little bit later. Yeah. Thank you very much. And the corresponding question in our survey is number 3 and number 4 that asks if you agree or if the respondent actually agrees with the hierarchy that we have provided. And I also recommend to read the corresponding chapters in our explanatory note, which is the chapter 6.5 and 6.6. Good. For those of you that actually wondered how such a tagging of narrative information works, we make a little illustration here on the tagging itself, because as we have seen in the first Slido, there are still there are many participants that have no practical experience with XBRL. So tagging of a human readable report usually works like this. And please keep in mind, we are not showing a specific tool or software here. It's just a way of showing how, in general, the process can be done. So the text in a human readable report, for instance, in a PDF or other document, could be selected, and then together with the IROs taxonomy, the tagging could be done by dragging and dropping the XBRL element or the XBRL tag, right? This is both the same thing, on the text itself. Yeah, this is a digital tagging. Yeah, this is how it usually works. And the same is, of course, true for the numerical elements. When we, for instance, have the water consumption, the corresponding numbers in the human readable report can be selected, and then the element from the XBRL taxonomy can be dragged and dropped. For the numerical items, of course, quantitative information, we need to have a little bit more information, like the year, the period actually, or the unit, for instance, cubic meter in this case, that need to be assigned. Yeah, but this is just one way of producing an inline XBRL document. There are also other ways how it can be done. We also discussed during our project a very, or a little bit different approach. We were thinking about the fact that it would also be possible to use our XBRL taxonomy for taxonomy-centric report preparation. And this basically means that the taxonomy itself is used to structure the report or even used as a template. So imagine the taxonomy is more being used like a questionnaire where an empty table is provided for the water consumption or an empty text box for the policies related to water and marine resources. In that case, a preparer might also be able to just fill in the information, yeah, instead of doing the tagging at the very end of the process once the report is actually done. Yeah, this is something that we considered, and that is also possible with our XBRL taxonomy, and we are also very much interested in feedback on this. So as you can see, there are multiple ways of producing such an XBRL report. Good, let's go to the next topic. Andrea.
Yes, the next topic. So the semi-narrative elements. So the taxonomy includes a lot, several semi-narrative elements, and at IFRAG, we considered the very beneficial of introducing these two data type elements in the taxonomy, which we think that will contribute to increase the comparability of the data. So where possible, we have converted some detailed requirements into Booleans or yes/no questions, and enumeration that we think that will support to prepare to select a choice from a predefined list. So we invest a lot of time, in particular in the discussion of the Booleans, and we have classified the Booleans into 3 different categories, as you can see in the slide. So the simple Booleans reflects the detailed requirement within the disclosure requirement associated with the use of weather in the human readable version of the SRS. The conditional Booleans reflects the positive or negative confirmation of some specific detailed requirements. So in brackets, there is an example of this digital transposition of the narrative statement into a yes or no answer. So for instance, if no such incidents have occurred, then the thing shall state this. So we have implemented this statement into a Boolean. And lastly, the technical Boolean has been created in order to facilitate the search filter associated with the relevant information. So, and the example in brackets shows the digital transposition into a Boolean of some requirements, in particular this example associated with the action air resources in particular areas at water risk. So this, according to our suggestion, will facilitate also the usability of the data. About the enumeration, so as I mentioned before, it's a predefined list like a drop-down menu, and we have created in order to facilitate the option to select to be selected from this list. So it will be just a single choice or a multiple choice. And in the box below, the arrow, the orange arrow, you can see some kind of example in which we implemented enumeration. For instance, in the case of the application requirement 16, in which we have a predefined list of topics, subtopics, and some subtopics that we have created an enumeration in order to be able to link this enumeration list with policy, action, and targets and metrics. So this is something that we think is important to mention and to implement in our taxonomy. I don't know, Richard, if you want to add some information about the semi-narrative or go into the Slido.
We can just go to the Slido. Do you agree that tagging semi-narrative XBRL elements will increase the comparability of the data? I can see that the majority agrees actually, and this is in line with the interviews that we had with users. So as part of our explanatory note in the appendix, you can find some interviews that we made with users of the data. And they also said, we learned also from their perspective that it's very important, those Booleans, because yeah, it will give, it will enrich the pure narrative text with more information, or not with more information, but with more easier to compare and to consume information. Yeah, great, thank you. Those are the corresponding questions in our public consultation, Q5A and Q5B. We had a specific discussion on the conditional Booleans in the SR tag, and therefore we ask a specific question for the conditional Booleans, and you can find more information in the explanatory note on those. Yeah, how can a Boolean tag actually be tagged? Let's also have a look at this, a very practical example. Imagine, because we are still talking about the human readable report, and some of the stakeholders that we have been contacted by have also had some doubts if it's possible to tag it in a human readable report. So how can I provide a yes or no disclosure in a human readable text in a PDF report like we usually know the annual reports? So the question is quite valid, but I can tell you it's quite simple in XBRL. So still a human readable sentence could be selected in the report, and then the tagging of a Boolean actually means that the technical value, so the yes or no, is provided together with the human readable sentence that is actually describing it. Yeah, so it's not needed in the human readable report to write yes or no or put a 0 or 1 as a confirmation, but this is actually a hidden information in the inline XBRL document that can be conveyed together with the human readable sentence that is actually being the confirmation, for instance. Yeah. Yeah, and the same is true for the enumeration elements. For the enumeration elements, it works, of course, a little bit different because, for instance, here we have matrix used for a target. It's basically a drop down where when you tag it, the entries can be selected. There is also the question: how can we keep the link with a human readable report? There are some mechanics in XBRL how to keep that link. Because those selections actually for the enumerations require a little bit more technical attribute, but it's still possible to keep the link in the human readable report. And as we have also shown in our tagged illustrative report, this is not anything new. The SEC, for instance, in the US is using those mechanisms already quite a long time, a few years already. And also EBA and IOPA with their regulatory reporting are using those enumerations quite long already. Good, let's go to the next topic, the implementation of IROs, policies, actions, targets, and metrics. First of all, IROs means impact, risk, and opportunities. And the impact, risk, and opportunity, this is a very important concept in the ESRS because it's actually following the materiality assessment, the disclosure of the outcome, right? The impacts, risk, and opportunities. And those are going to be disclosed together with policies, actions, targets, and metrics. And of course, those are actually linked to each other or related to each other. And in order to keep that relationship from a digital perspective, we have implemented some specific tags in our XBRL taxonomy, some specific elements. For instance, enumeration elements with the topics, but also with type dimensions that allow to link certain IROs with policies or targets. We call those soft links because it's not a strict relationship, but we still consider it very useful and also in the spirit of the disclosure requirements, which actually require to relate the disclosures. So this is just a slide that illustrates it a little bit. We have on the left, starting with the materiality assessment, the topics and subtopics, and then of course, the IROs, the impact, risk, and opportunities. And here on the right, we just put it sample, impact A, risk B, and so on, because it needs to be, of course, entity specific. Following that, there might be policies that are being disclosed, actions and their related resources, targets, and metrics. But it is, of course, also possible to not disclose. There are specific XBRL tags, also just based on the ESRS text, that allow to disclose that no policies, for instance, have been disclosed. Yeah, so it's not a mandatory tagging. We also illustrated that a little bit more in our explanatory note, and since it's such an important topic, we also provided illustration of application instructions in our explanatory note, because this is not something that has been done before in financial reporting. This is definitely something new, and this linking between the different disclosures, and therefore we explained it a little bit more, and we also hope, of course, that ESMA will pick up those application instructions then in the tagging rule. Yeah, now it's your time to react. What do you think about the modeling of IROs, policies, actions, targets, and metrics? Thank you very much for participating in the Slido. I think it's quite clear that it needs a little bit more education, or people need to look at it a little bit closer. And but I think also it's quite good to see that many participants believe that it's important to keep that link. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much. And this is a corresponding question in our survey. This is a little bit more technical, therefore we put it XBRL experts only. But of course, if you read the explanatory note and if you have the feeling that that you can provide any feedback on this, then please feel free to do so. One topic that we also discussed, or another topic that we also discussed a lot, was entity-specific and additional disclosures. The entity-specific disclosures can be provided with typed dimensions in the XBRL taxonomy. And the typed dimensions are just a very simple mechanism of disaggregating information. So assuming that you have only one tag for or one XBRL element for a certain thing in the taxonomy, the type dimension allows you to provide it for multiple topics or for multiple policies, actions, and targets, and so on. We have implemented it as a type dimensions. In contrast to the IFRS accounting taxonomy, for instance, which is using or relying on explicit dimensions, the advantage of the type dimension is that they're way simpler to tag, and that there is no need to create a taxonomy-specific extension for those items. And we think it's really worth doing it like this. And yeah, we provided also all the examples in the illustrative reports. The same mechanism can, of course, be used for completely or let's not necessarily complete, but for really entity-specific disclosures. For instance, metrics that are stemming from other legislation or generally accepted sustainability frameworks. And we have implemented the same mechanism for the MDRM disclosure requirement, as you can see in the middle here, where any other metric can, and its value, of course, can be disclosed together with a connection to the topic and subtopic and with a type dimension in order to make it not a duplicate tag in the report, right? In order to disaggregate the different entity-specific metrics in one report. This similar approach has been implemented for the targets as well. And last but not least, of course, we provide an other material or entity-specific information narrative tag in the XBRL taxonomy that can be used for any other disclosures or entity-specific disclosures in the report, and is also very powerful in the combination with an enumeration element and the type dimension. I need to apologize, this is a little bit more technical, so I ask all the XBRL experts in the call. We have seen in the first Slido that that we have a few in the room to look at this question quite closely and provide information for us. Good. I also had a slide on open hypercubes. Maybe I just explained that very briefly. We also had a question on this one and a lot of discussions in the past. Open hypercubes is, again, very technical. Please, everybody else, stop listening for 1 minute if you are not interested in this technical stuff. It basically means that we provide in the ESRS XBRL taxonomy the possibility to combine, or a flexible way to combine disaggregations. For instance, when you imagine the scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions, you can disaggregate by greenhouse gas category, by countries, and by value chain. But we don't prescribe exactly which combinations are shown in the report. And also additional, optional disaggregations can be provided, like the operating segments, the subsidiary, or even in theory, it would be possible to use the gender dimension for the greenhouse gas emissions, which wouldn't make sense, right? But this is this is something that the open hypercubes allow. This is just, please forget about the gender at the right corner. Yeah, this is just showing that what open hypercubes will enable. But keep in mind, the alternative to open hypercubes is that we prescribe all the possible combinations, which is quite a lot in the ESRS. And even we don't know for some of the disclosures if it's even possible to have all the combinations. Yeah, because companies might still decide to combine certain numbers, for instance, for the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, so and therefore we decided to have that flexible approach. But again, it's for experts, so don't worry if this was not very clear. It's just a little detail in the taxonomy. Good. We need to hurry up a little bit. We have something on the validation rules implemented in the taxonomy. We have 3 validation rules implemented. One for the EU data points. The EU data points shall always be disclosed according to ESRS 1 paragraph 35. And then we have so therefore we implemented a validation rule that is displaying an error message if those are not existing in the report, right? Even if they are considered to be not material, they need to be tagged as not material, right? Then we have another validation rule for the disclosures that are outside the materiality assessment, which are basically all the ESRS 2 data points and a few IRO 1 in each of the topical standards. Those shall always be disclosed, but we only show a warning here. We don't show an error message. And last but not least, we have implemented one validation rule that is showing signaling not material matrix. In case a matrix is not being disclosed, it's showing an information, right, that this matrix is deemed to be not material for the users. So this is not, it's not so much a validation rule, it's more like a message that is being shown to the preparers and to the users of the data that matrix not being disclosed are deemed to be not material. And this is, of course, also based on paragraph 34b in ESRS 1. Yeah, what about the validation rules? Do you find those helpful? That was quite a quick rundown through the validation rules, so I can understand if it was maybe a little bit too fast. I recommend you to have a look at the explanatory note to better understand the validation rules. But in general, I think validation rules are always good to improve the data quality. So yeah, that is of course something that we might be interested in the future. And this is also why we provide you here a an additional word cloud. Now you can in Slido type in something. For which areas should IFRAG introduce more additional validation rules? So if you think of something where we should have more quality checks or more consistency checks, mandatory data point, for instance, thank you very much, then of course you can type in anything, and yeah, we are very much interested. Inconsistent data evolution, I assume this is probably related to data being disclosed across multiple periods. Yeah, there's of course an interesting point. But also there are too many already. So 3 validation rules are considered to be too many already. Interesting. Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I think this is quite a lot to input. I didn't expect so much. Thank you so much. Yeah. Good. And last but not least, in our public consultation, we have, of course, any text box where you can provide any other input for us. So we invite everybody now to, not now, but to take part in the public consultation. Of course, it's still open till the 8th of April if you haven't done so, and provide your feedback and any other comment or suggestions as part of the online survey. Great. And to give you just a quick heads up how the data actually can be consumed after it has been produced by a company, we provided this illustration, and thank you, Davide, from my team who provided this animation. So first of all, from the human readable tagged report, an extract can be created that can then be used to, for instance, put the raw data, the Booleans and the hard facts, everything that we have in the XBRL being tagged into a database, right? So imagine on the left side, we have a sustainability statement 2026, and then this data set together with the human readable and the machine readable is actually being transported to the users of the data, and they will of course be very happy when they get the digital information being tagged. Yeah, this is just an illustration how the process, the information value chain actually works. Yeah, in order to illustrate for everybody that has not been doing XBRL before. Yeah, I think so far we have reached the end of our presentation. Let me check. We have a few more Slido polls, and maybe we can quickly run through those. Which digital matters need more education and guidance from IFRAG before we actually go to the panel discussion? This is another Slido question. So if you think that IFRAG should provide more educational guidance, please let us know here in the Slido, or if you liked any of the aspects that we showed. It seems it's quite equally distributed among the different topics. Thank you very much. And then the next one is, IFRAG aims to deliver the final ESRS Set 1 taxonomy in summer 24. Do you think that it will facilitate the preparation of the sustainability statements of the first year reporting? This is also interesting. Majority seems to be clearly on that it will help to structure the disclosures. And I think with this, we can start with maybe 1 or 2 questions that we have from the Slido, and then we start with a panel discussion, because I think it will be very good to also hear what people are saying. Andrea and Davide, do we have any pressing question from the Slido that we shall answer now before we go to the panel?
For me, there is a question on the open item cubes. Are there any implications from open item cubes for preparers? or is just a technical issue that taxonomy may be disregarded when tagging a report?
No, the open hypercubes, this is an interesting question. From preparer's perspective, are actually more flexible than closed hypercubes. Let me say it like this. So actually, when you tag the ESRS taxonomy as it is, as of today, the draft taxonomy, with closed or open hypercubes, as a preparer, you won't notice any difference in the first place. There may be only very rare cases where certain disclosures could be, or disaggregations could be combined, where the taxonomy would display an error message and say, this combination of a disaggregation is not being allowed by the taxonomy. While in an open with an open hypercube, this error message wouldn't be shown, right? So from a preparer's perspective, the open hypercubes are actually more flexible, right? But and there's no other difference than that, because the whole appearance, the whole structure of the taxonomy, and also the hypercubes that we provide in the taxonomy are no different, right? They are not in any way different if they are closed or open. Yeah? It's just a consequence in terms of how can disaggregations of certain data points be combined.
There is another question about will there be a style guide document released to transform XBRL to Inline XBRL?
No, I don't think so, because the purpose, of course, is of the ESEF format, and keep in mind, I'm not speaking on behalf of ESMA, which will need to publish the ESRS taxonomy as part of the ESEF format, European Single Electronic Format, that the annual report is actually being prepared in the Inline XBRL format. So there's no option to produce first an XBRL report and then an Inline XBRL report after that. So it's the other way around, actually. The Inline XBRL report needs to be prepared, and then the technical data set can be extracted from that. But there's no option yet, at least as of my opinion, that it could be done the other way around. There is a small exception, I would say, or small opportunity in the future for the SMEs, because I think the small and medium enterprises, they actually wouldn't need to make a glossy or of highly formatted inline XBRL report. There, I think it would be possible to maybe just go for the technical XBRL format without the human readable layer. Also for the supply chain, if data is needed for the consolidated ESRS statements. But this is just an exception, right? This is also not our primary purpose as of now. So to give a clear answer, no, it's not possible.
Yes, and just to say that there is a specific question if there is any plan for a voluntary SME taxonomy. There is, I think, is linked to you said before, but of course our focus is at the moment of in the preparation of the taxonomy for the large set of the SRS, and then we can move to the listed SME taxonomy. But there is no legal obligation about the voluntary SME taxonomy at the moment.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrea. And with this, maybe we can hand over to Chiara, which might also want to add something to that question a little bit later. It's a pleasure, maybe to introduce the speakers, Chiara, and the panelists.
Yes, well, thanks a lot, and thanks also for this interactive session. I mean, I apologize again for the technical issue that we are having, and we are going to send the slides to all that are participating, so that at least you will have the slides as a reference. So let's move now to the panel. So I am Chiara Del Prete. I chair the Sustainability Reporting Technical Expert Group. So in this capacity, I have been following first the work of standard setting before even the tag was constituted, and then after the supervision of, I am in charge of the supervision of the technical work of the Secretariat, so included also this part on XBRL. But with me today, I have very distinguished speakers from different point of views, different perspectives. So I have John Turner on my left. Here is the Chief Executive Officer of XBRL International, and is responsible for enhancing the standards and supporting the adoption of XBRL globally. Through his career, he has been focusing on improving business reporting and analytics, and he has been a leading member of XBRL community since 2001 when the community was founded. So welcome, John, and thank you for being with us. Of course, we expect from you this technical point of view and also a window on the international developments. Then on my right, I have Marc Houllier, who is a co-founder of Corporate Ratings, a company that uses XBRL data and provides solutions for audit firms and analysts. And Marc is also member of EFRAG Digital Reporting Consultative Forum, the body that has advised the TAG and the board in this difficult task of preparation of the XBRL taxonomy. And Marc has previously worked at Invoke as a lead engineer and project manager. Thanks for being with us, Marc. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Stefan Schnell connected online, who is Senior Vice President in BASF, Group Reporting and Performance Management, so very close to the implementation of ESRS, but also to their standard setting, being member of the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board, representing Business Europe. So he will be bringing the perspective also of the preparers into this discussion. He is member of the digital committee also. The digital committee, EFRAG Digital Committee, is a subgroup of TAG and board member who have volunteered to speed up the process of review of the taxonomy on behalf of the TAG and the board. So, Richard, this panel actually starts with a few questions that you want to ask to me.
Indeed, it's very interesting because you have been heavily involved in the standard setting process itself, Chiara. So I just wanted to give you a chance maybe to share a little bit more detail. So the first question for you is actually to get the discussion kicked off. The narrative disclosures play an important role in the ESRS reporting. Can you please explain why? And also, what is the difference between the narrative disclosures in financial reporting?
Yes, so basically, if you look at the notes to the financial statements, they accompany the primary statements. The key difference with the sustainability statements is that the narrative information in the sustainability statement, they have an independent informative value, irrespective of the fact that they explain the methodology to calculate a number or the context surrounding a trend in a number or in a figure. So this is very important because they have an autonomous and independent informative value. Then if we look at the data points in ESRS, only 18% of them are numerical. So this gives you an idea of the magnitude of the narrative information in the sustainability, in the ESRS sustainability statements. And of them, well, in total, 65% are narrative. And 17% are semi-narrative, and you have seen the illustration of how important is the work that we have done to help to define a more rigorous structure surrounding the narrative information. So when you describe information such as the governance, the strategy, the policies, the action, how could we get comparability of the content? So that's why what we have tried to do is we think innovative, because we wanted to deliver what the CSRD has asked us to do, so to have more comparable and high quality information. But there is also another element on the narrative in the sustainability statement, which is the more pervasive role of forward-looking assertions. And so the more you look into the future, the more is uncertain, the more errors there may be, and so the more contextual information is also needed to explain the limits, the accuracy that results from the estimate, the proxies that were used, and so on and so forth. So also very, very important. Okay, so that is all on this first question.
Thank you. And since Patrick mentioned it already, the ESRS Set 1 have been drafted in a way that it supports digitization. Could you please explain how this has been done?
Yes, we wanted to have a bit the best of the combination of the two possible approaches to standard setting. One approach is the principle-based approach, where you basically define what is the objective of disclosure and you leave the preparer the freedom to identify which are the data points that are needed to fulfill that disclosure objective. The advantage of this principle-based approach is that it caters for the specificities of the company, so it can be more relevant. But at the same time, we wanted also to have a de minimis minimum information, which is predefined. So that's why you find first the disclosure objective. So the objective of this disclosure is to describe the roles and responsibility of the board of directors in setting, supervising the sustainability matters, for example. Then immediately after, the disclosure shall include A, B, C. So that is the minimum list of disclosures that we think would be able to provide a complete depiction of the objective itself. And then there is always the possibility to have an entity specific on top. So the list, the shall include, is never exhaustive. And the companies shall include whatever is needed to fulfill that objective. When needed, below the Roman in A, B, and C, and this is not every time. It's a minority of cases where we go below A, B, and C. We also have the Roman in 1, 2, or 3. And this has been done when we thought there was a sufficient element of separability. Separability in terms of the user who was going to use the specific information, but also in the preparation itself to count the number of different information and data points that are needed. So of course this will result in extra effort for the preparers compared to a narrative of a tag block, to tag a block of narrative in PDF. But we are confident that this is the way to provide really that extra quality for the narrative information to deliver finally the quality that the CSRD is trying to foster. But this is the core of the consultation, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And speaking about the data points, the IFRAC has also published the IG3, the list of data points. Could you please quickly elaborate on the relationship between the ESRS digital taxonomy and the data point list?
Yes, well, basically the role of this list is to be a complete inventory of data points. And it was important to provide it to the market as soon as possible to allow to run the gap analysis. The structure of, and there is consistency in methodology between this list and the XBRL taxonomy. But still, the XBRL taxonomy has separate and different additional attributes that are not needed in a human use of the list of data points. So the list of data points is built to be used humanly. So you use on Excel. So the difference is that in the XBRL, there are additional elements. give you an example for the tables. We only have one line in the Excel, while you have a table in the XBRL taxonomy, or in the Booleans, whether and how, we have one line in the Excel while we have two different elements in the Excel. So they are very close and consistent one with the other, but they serve different purposes. It is important to use this list for what has been already described during the presentation, a sort of taxonomy-centric approach to the preparation of the report. We recommend that the preparers use this list, which is based on the structure of the standards, in order to start preparing their human readable reports. Because if the human readable report is prepared having in front of the preparer the structure of the digitalization, it will be more easy to structure the information in a way that will accommodate also the digitalization when time comes.
Thank you, Chiara. Andrea, do you have anything to add?
I think that Chiara already covered everything. So of course we have published the draft IG3, and we are working, because we have received a lot of comments from the stakeholders, and we are working in order to be able to deliver our final version of IG3 in a month. Maybe Chiara can be more precise about the timeline.
Well, yes, let's wait for the next few weeks and see. Well, hopefully we can be quick there. So let's turn the attention on the user's views, which play a very important role in this consultation, because ultimately we are working to enable the usability of these data digitally. So what are the requirements, Mark, on a digital ESRS statement in order to be most useful for a digital report? What would you find in an ideal digital statement?
Thank you for the question, Chiara. The first quality I would like in an ESRS digital statement is completeness. So ESRS 1 makes it clear that information that we are going to find in the print statements is to be concise and material, which means that it contains only the information that is useful to users. So if any of that information was missing in the digital reports, then of course digital users would be missing some crucial information. So that's the baseline. And then by being in the digital format, there are some enhancing qualities that we hope to find in the ESRS statement. The first one is the ability to consume data from reports in other languages, right? It's very important in Europe to be able to consume data from other languages. And the digital format, by being a single pair of identifiers for metrics, allows us to be a first step towards doing that. The second one is to have a more accurate interpretation of the information that is narrative. So that's the Booleans and extensible enumerations. In order to be able to efficiently compute the information, that's also something that is very useful. And the last one is to be able to link together information that can be remote in the report. So several pieces of information talking about the same policies, the same risk, can be placed in remote places in the report. And we hope that in the digital formats, there will be use of the linking between different pieces of information. Now, if we look at the ideal statement, it's hard to define really what's the ideal statement, but I can give you examples of what, for me, the ideal statement would enable. So if I'm a fund manager, I would like to be able to collect the reports from my portfolio and be able to extract from them exactly the metrics I need to feed into my own report, right? As a fund manager, I also have reporting requirements, and I would like to be able to complete them. If I'm a company and in my value chain, I have companies that report in ESRS, I would like to be able to get their digital reports and use that to pre-feed into my own information, know the risks, the opportunities in that value chain, and also to pre-fill the part of the metrics for this part of my value chain. And as an end user, let's say from the civil society, I would like to be able to consume digital reports and know in just one instant whether a company has defined targets in a consistent way across the year, and to know whether the current metric is consistent with the target they gave 5 years ago, for instance. So if we can get digital reports that achieve that, I think we'll have some pretty good information.
Thank you, Mark. We've seen the description of this strange object, which is called the Booleans. Can you explain to us why it is so important for the users to have these elements?
Yes. Well, the first reason is, once again, completeness, right? Some of the information required by the standard is expressed in the form of true or false, right? For instance, does the company have collective bargaining agreements in the European Economic Area? So this information is by nature Boolean. So if we want the users to understand them, that it needs to be expressed as either true or false in the digital formats. Now, the second reason is it improves comparability of an information. Users usually do not consume sensitive information for a single company, right? It needs to be put in context. The first way it can be put in context is by comparing it with other companies. Now you need to retrieve the information of other companies, but usually you will not compare it to just the sum of all companies. You need some context. You need to find the right set of companies to compare it with. So for instance, one way to do it traditionally is sectors, but sectors is quite a crude way to compare companies. We would like to select companies that have similar circumstances to the one you are looking at. So you need a set of criteria to find companies that are similar, and Booleans are exactly made in the right format to be able to filter and find companies that have specific circumstances. The second way to also compare companies and put simply the context is to compare it to scientific benchmarks, for instance, to answer the question, which is the company actually sustainable? And in the same way, research defining thresholds is usually made on a subset of companies that fit certain criteria. And the way the standards were done is that these Booleans align well with these criteria. So they allow users to select the right subset of companies for which the information can be compared to, or to find the right research and to link the metrics in the report to the right research to know whether the company is actually sustainable.
And is there any area of improvement for the draft taxonomy that we have issued? Is there something that you could suggest?
So it's definitely quite usable, and I think it's pretty good. One thing that I would like to suggest is maybe the X in XBRL has not been used enough, right? Sustainability is a new domain. So it has its own feature, its own characteristic, its own patterns and links of information. Now, XBRL is a standard that's quite open, right? It allows users to define new types of relations, and some of them have been standardized across the year to fit the domains for which XBRL was applied: accounting, and also bank and insurance reporting. Now, sustainability is its own domain, and we can see that there are some very specific relations, for instance, between the risks and policies, risks and action plans, targets, etc. Also, some new information, some more information that was not present in other reports, like forward-looking information. So I would like to say maybe the taxonomy sometimes has tried to reuse too many of the things that were defined as being good practice or common practice in the past, and maybe you should try to innovate some more, right? Be bold, and the standard will follow you and look at what you are doing. I've seen, for example, many stakeholders criticize the fact that the taxonomy was using extensible enumeration in Inline XBRL because that was not common practice, and saying you come up in your notes with a mechanism to link it, and that's not standard. But you cannot wait for the standard to come, right? You should show an example, and then the standard will see what different standard setters of sustainability have done in common and make it standard. So I would like to say, do not hesitate to be bold and do what needs to be done to make such information as best represented as it can. And now, if we want to ask you what was especially well done, I guess, in the taxonomy. So first, well, the introduction of this categorical information, Booleans and enumerations. And also the inclusion of some detailed classifications like NACE classification, right, for sectors. Having detailed values is really useful, I think, for everyone. And I would like to encourage you to do some more for countries and other types of categories if possible.
Thank you. It's very, very helpful input, and for sure we will look very carefully at whatever we get from the consultation from you and all the others to get it better, even better. Let's move now on the other side of the screen and ask a question to Stefan. You had a privileged perspective in the development of this taxonomy. You may remember that the TAG and the board approved the methodology on which basis then the taxonomy was developed, and that dated back 1 year ago, so in April 2023. So as a board member, having been also in the digital committee, so involved in the review, can you describe how that review looked like?
Yes, Chiara, thanks a lot first for the invitation and for setting up this, I think, extremely important event, because understanding well the digital taxonomy is of crucial importance as a key element for future sustainability reporting. And in this regard, I would like to thank Richard and Andrea for leading us through this exercise over the last few months, which was very interesting, very insightful, also a great learning experience, and happy to be part of this. As you said, I mean, we have discussed this topic a number of times in the TAG, in the board, but as you have perceived from today's presentation, I think it also becomes very quickly very detailed and very technical, and that tends to overwhelm a number of people, which is, I think, why we have also set up the consultative forum that you have mentioned, where Mark was member of, and many other people. And here I actually recommend strongly also visiting the EFRAG website to get a glimpse of how this forum was composed, because I think having this kind of body in place to get sounding on the proposals and come up with the concept that we have ultimately developed was extremely helpful. And you see actually a number of very well-experienced preparers, users, experts in the field of the XBRL taxonomy. So I think having this forum in place was one key element. And the second element actually was this digital committee composed out of members of the TAG and the board, in order to also reflect the governance structure properly of EFRAG, so that we actually had a team in place that reviewed very much in detail the taxonomy that the team has come up with, and compared actually the original standards with the taxonomy proposals. And I think this comparison was extremely important, because we also uncovered and just came up with some questions that we had to really discuss and fine-tune further. And ultimately, all those outcomes from the work of the team, the digital forum, or the consultative forum, and the digital committee has made its way into the TAG, into the board, and was ultimately endorsed by those two bodies. So I think the process was fairly well-rounded between, as I said, external insights that helped us to develop the concept that we have now on the table, but also taking into account the proper governance flows within EFRAG, and that I think really made this quite comprehensive as a package, and quite successful at the end.
Thank you, Stefan. Following up, always and benefiting from your role in the board, Patrick described this process of definition of the taxonomy as neutral as possible, in the sense of trying to reflect the text of the ESRS themselves and its architecture. Can you explain to us why this approach is so important, and how it has been applied in developing the taxonomy?
I think this item, as obvious as it sounds, is probably one of the most important ones, because the taxonomy is truly there to just translate technically what has been defined content-wise in the ESRS, but not to preempt or even assume certain things. I still remember one discussion that we had with Richard on one item where it was about describing certain financial impacts or impacts on financial items in the company's financial statements. And we had a big debate about coming up with a table to break up those financial impacts into impact on sales, on profits, on cash flow. And we really clearly said, no, let's not do this, because that would preempt something that is not written in the standard. So you need to be extremely detailed and careful when developing the digital taxonomy, so that you stick to the original text of the standard. At the same time, and let me add this to the answer, I think we have done our best to come up with a taxonomy that is as close as possible to the original text of the ESRS. However, when putting this into practice, people will find out that there are situations where things are still unclear or don't match. That also is kind of shown typically through practical experience. So we will need to keep some flexibility to also adjust the digital taxonomy going forward, while still obviously keeping it intact to a large extent. But this flexibility and learning together over the at least first years of digital reporting will be quite important in order to really fulfill the purpose that users have in mind when they talk about using digital reports in the future, or digital reporting formats in the future.
Thank you. Another question from your perspective. Now we know that implementation of ESRS already the human readable format is very challenging, and then we are probably adding new challenges with this tagging exercise. Can you tell us what are the specific challenges of tagging the report?
Yeah, I'm also now telling a bit from practical experience with our own tagging of the notes in particular over the last 2 years. I mean, we've done tagging for the financial statements already for a few years, but that was fairly straightforward technically. The notes already became quite more challenging. I think there's a couple of items. I think first you need to really look at implementation of the ESRS or the CSRD and the ESRS requirements jointly with digital text tagging. So I would not simply implement CSRD and ESRS requirements in a kind of in a human readable format and then put some kind of tagging onto it 1 or 2 years later. I would start thinking it almost from scratch right from the beginning, so that you actually think combined between human readable reporting and machine readable reporting, because otherwise you will run into issue when implementing the machine readable reporting at a later point in time. That is actually also something that I learned through the process. I thought at the beginning it was easier to first implement just the human readable format and then put the tagging on top of it later. I think by now that you need to do this almost in parallel, or at least think it in parallel, so that you set up a structure that fits both purposes. That is one thing. And the other thing is people should not underestimate the effort. And that is not a criticism, this is more like a hint. Because when you talk about large companies with much or many disclosures, you easily talk about 200-300 pages in today's world of sustainability reporting, if that is even sufficient. So that is a massive amount of tagging that you will need to do, and you will need to select the right tool that allows you efficient setting up of the human readable and machine readable reporting. And you need to have proper processes in place, including an audit process at the end that still fits to your timelines. So you really need to think this very broadly as a topic between human readable, machine readable reporting, and the establishing of all this in a timely manner, including audit processes. So that truly is a massive project in itself that doesn't doesn't have to be underestimated, and really needs to be thought holistically to make it really successful.
Thank you, Stefan. This is what we call the taxonomy-centric way to implement the standards themselves. Let me turn now on John. This taxonomy has been built using features that are well known. Features of XBRL standard, Booleans, enumeration, typed dimensions. How can you explain why this is not new, but still it's innovative in terms of tagging the reports?
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you very much for having me and the opportunity to spend some time with everyone this afternoon. Let me start by answering that question by stepping back. I think just to reinforce what Mark was saying earlier, sometimes I come across people who feel as though, I've produced my 200 or 300 page report, and my expectation is that there's a whole lot of long-only investors that are going to spend a lot of time reading that entire report. That those people don't exist so much anymore. We have a very, very diverse set of investors and other users of this information. And it's not just investors that this information is explicitly aimed at. And one of the most important aspects of that of the digitization of this reporting for those kinds of users is the ability to do some screening. So I'm only interested in companies who are improving their water usage. Let's just go and find those ones. That's a simple one. Okay, let's look at the metrics. But maybe there are measures in these Booleans or in these enumerations which will help people narrow down the information that they're seeking to answer the questions that they're looking for, whether that's because they're constructing a portfolio, whether that's because they're activists that are pointing fingers at companies, that's legitimate too, whether they're companies that are understanding what their competitors are doing. These features of being able to just narrow things down, filter, or in investment terms, screening, is really important. And if you talk to the data providers about how they use voluntary data that exists in the sustainability space today, well, one of the first things they do with narrative information, you might have 3 paragraphs about changes that are being made to gender diversity within the senior ranks of management. That might be 9 paragraphs of HREs that if you're very, very clever, you will understand. And if you're not familiar with that language, you won't. Simply by adding a Boolean to that, here's a way of understanding this is a company that is improving in this context or is not improving in this context. And that's what the users want. So what the data providers have been doing with voluntary information is adding their own Booleans to this information to permit screening. Now that might be what the company intends, or maybe it's not. So it's much better for the companies to have the opportunity to make these assertions themselves. They're telling their story, which is a really important part of these sustainability disclosures. So I think that the choices that IFRAG have made here make sense in terms of all of those different kinds of users. And as being already hinted, these are not new parts of the XBRL standard. The XBRL standard has been around for 20 years. It's in use in more than 200 mandatory regulatory frameworks around the world, around about 70 countries. That's growing quite quickly because of sustainability in terms of numbers of countries in particular. So Booleans, I think, is relatively straightforward. Yes, that means that will, in technical terms, be a hidden fact, but that's okay because the utility of that hidden fact is very high. But the use of extensible enumerations, I know there's amongst the technical community, there's been questions about how this might work. And this is something that's being done by the SEC for a couple of years, or 3 or 4 years now. And the extensible enumerations 2.0 specification, which is the technical mechanism that makes all of this work, that's been part of our certification process for 4 years now. So this is not brand new. This is pushing what you want to have disclosed, make it helpful for people. And I agree with what Mark said earlier. It's okay to push some of those boundaries. The reporting hasn't stayed still, and therefore neither can software and neither can the standards, the technical standards, the XBRL standards.
Thank you, John. Another question for you. XBRL International has a special working group on digital sustainability disclosure. Can you tell us more about this group and what you are doing?
Yeah, sure. So as you are all aware, you're not living in an island. The whole world is moving towards different kinds of mandatory sustainability disclosures. This is a seismic change for companies right around the world. It is a consistent theme for securities regulators and standard setters around the world as they shift towards expanding reporting, which has been financial forever, to incorporate a whole host of sustainability measures. And those policymakers are asking for this information to be mandatory and to be digital for all the reasons that I just mentioned. I think that something like there's a number of surveys, but the one that we keep on sticking back to is that something like 70% of larger corporates believe that they will be reporting under 3 or more standards in multiple jurisdictions. I don't know whether that's true. We don't know exactly where all this policy landscape is going to land yet, but we've been concerned for some time about the fact that there will be different rules in different countries, and that creates problems for issuers. Wait, I've got to deal with multiple standards, and it also creates problems for users. I've got to compare that with that. So with that in mind, 5 months ago now, we started a thing called the Stakeholder Interest Group, which for XBRL International is a bit of an unusual beast. It's an externally funded exercise, funded kindly by philanthropy, including Tipping Point, Porticus, and ClimateWorks, to help bring the technical people, Richard and his colleagues from around the world, from the main standard setting bodies, to get together every couple of weeks. And indeed, there's a meeting in this afternoon where the folk get together and discuss some of the issues that are unique to sustainability. Some of those things like extensible enumerations and Booleans, but then simpler things like, wait, there's lots of units that are unusual, that are not used in financial reporting. So we need to know about a host of things like, what's an example? So the rate to which water is used per unit of currency in revenue. Well, there's a sort of a compound element there. So those kinds of things needed to be developed. They need to be tested. They need to be incorporated into, in that case, our units registry. That work within the SIG has been deliberately run under sort of Chatham House rules. It's in large part to try to bring folk together, let them have a dialogue, and also to discover these questions. But the results of that work is not private. It is available. You can go and look at quite a bit of it at dsd.xbrl.org, which provides a host of the outputs of that group, and there are more to come. What that group creates is sort of create a level of consensus on some of these technical things and create what they call a proposed best practice, which then gets put into our ordinary standards making function. So it goes to our XBRL standards board and our best practices board to develop more formal agreements. So it has looked at things like Booleans and enumerations. It's also looked at questions about how to link information, because linking information is a core part of sustainability disclosures and happens in a much more frequent and a much more important manner in some respects than in the financial statements. And it's looked at a range of interoperability questions. However, having said that, it is by no means a policy-making body. So it is not able to kind of create connections between standards. It is merely providing a discussion forum to create, hopefully, more consistent taxonomies. Now, they're not entirely consistent, and I want to use one very specific example and explain why. So if you look at the IFRS ISSB taxonomy, for those of you that have got up to that one yet, that uses it uses more dimensions and uses a set of extensions that are provided by companies. So, for example, how to produce segments and the like. Whereas the EFRAG taxonomy is using these type dimensions to approach that same problem in a way that requires slightly less sophisticated software. And there's a reason for that, because although we might all be focused on big listed companies today, there's whatever they are, 50,000, 45,000, some large number of significant private companies across Europe will eventually have to be doing this. So making it simpler has been a design consideration for EFRAG, which is not quite the same within IFRS. So they're not identical, but you know, there's more alignment there than there would have been if that group hadn't existed. And I'd like to thank Richard and all of his colleagues from the ISSB and the US SEC and some of the voluntary standard setting bodies that have been working together in a very collaborative manner for more than 2 years.
Well, continuing on this vein, before coming back to our taxonomy, then I would like to ask you a question on digital interoperability, which is also our current challenge with the ISSB, but also with GRI and with other platforms that will enable the consumption of our data. And one of the concepts that we have approached and we are considering is the so-called digital concordance tables. Can you explain how this table would work and how it could help to avoid double reporting and double tagging?
Yeah, sure. So I've just said that the SIG is not a policy-making body. It certainly is not. But it has developed some proofs of concept, which are available at that website I mentioned earlier, that show the way that it might be possible to create links between taxonomies. Now, that's not something that we normally do. This is a new set of requirements. But obviously those requirements exist, because if you're an investor and you're interested in Japanese companies that might be reporting under the ISSB and comparing them with their peers in Europe, well, you've got to be able to compare that data. Equally, if you're a Japanese company and you also have to report under CSRD, well, how do you go about that? So the idea of this concordance mechanism is an agreement, an official agreement between the standard setters about a set of assertions. And those assertions could be quite simple. This thing here in the EFRAG taxonomy is the same as that thing in the IFRS taxonomy or in the GRI taxonomy. Equally, it could be the opposite. This is not the same. Don't assume that this is the same. That's just as important, especially for users. And then you will end up with more complex things. So you'll have compound metrics that need to be defined, and you'll have, in particular, questions about granularity of narratives. So it's not a simple process, but it's a question of creating official assertions, if you like, which won't get you everywhere. But the idea with it is that it might get with the use of suitably functional software, would be able to consume these assertions, take a CSRD disclosure and create 80%, 90%, I don't know, some proportion of an ISSB disclosure. Everyone here understands that at the moment that's, you know, just a subset of the CSRD disclosure, but ISSB will grow over time, right? So that process is the goal of that effort, and that's an active discussion amongst the standard setters. And it's great that the standard setters are talking about this, and we're very happy to help.
Indeed, a very important work stream. Now, coming back to our draft and the consultation, I asked to Mark what he thought we could improve, and I will ask the same to you. Is there something that we could do differently or better?
So I think I've got a couple of suggestions that are perhaps a little technical, although the first one is not technical. Lorem ipsum dolor sit amet is it's for graphic designers. It's not helpful to the rest of us. And those examples in the materials, if they could be turned into real examples, there are any number of areas where that would let things fall into place for people, I think. And I know that's very hard to do. We have discussions with your colleagues in London about the same thing. You know, getting real examples will be really helpful. Great to have so many people here today that are probably working on this. You can maybe provide your examples to IFRAG and then they can use those to help. So that would be great. And we'll note, in the interest of time, we don't need to get into the details, but I think we disagree with the soft links approach that Richard was mentioning earlier, the fact that there are linkages, for example, between targets and actions and policies where you're wanting to show the linkage across disclosures. But the mechanism, the soft mechanism, probably creates suboptimal results. So we would actually encourage a sort of more technically complete approach to that one. But read more in our comment letter.
Absolutely, looking forward, of course, looking forward to have more details on this point. Well, now I will ask, approaching the end of this Q&A, I will ask to Richard something about the process and the involvement of the European Commission and ESMA after EFRAG. So the taxonomy will be finalized this summer, and then we hand over to the Commission and ESMA. Can you describe what is the most important for ESMA to implement the XBRL taxonomy?
First of all, I would like to thank all John and Mark and Stefan for all the feedback you provided so far, and yeah, it's very much appreciated. Thank you. So regarding the process, and by the way, I saw already a question on this in the chat about a phasing in and everything. It must be very clear that IFRAG itself, we are not responsible for the tagging rule, right? We are just providing the taxonomy, and then it's in ESMA, so the European Securities Market Authority's responsibility and remit to actually define the tagging rule itself, right? So what is actually mandating companies? And this includes also, of course, things like a phasing in that ESMA might decide after doing I think even their own consultation and cost-benefit analysis, yeah, where we have no impact on, I guess. So, but of course, the technical delivery that we are providing to ESMA is very important, and from my point of view, it's very important. And this was also very clear when we looked at the survey results, and also what John and Mark said about the links, right? Linking certain disclosures, is that not the taxonomy only in terms of the elements itself will be considered by ESMA, but also the mechanics that we have provided in the XBRL taxonomy. For instance, the mechanisms to link certain things. If you now use soft links or hard links, like John I think is proposing, is not really it does not really make a difference. But the fact that you do this, that you keep the spirit and the character of the disclosure requirements of the ESRS, is key from my point of view, because otherwise, if the taxonomy will not be applied in that fashion or in that manner, then it might result in a situation where the digital disclosures are less useful than they could be actually. Yeah, and that's why I think it's just my recommendation to ESMA also to really look at our explanatory note and all the documentation that we have provided and the tagged examples, and really to get the feeling and the understanding of the nature of the ESRS, and to reflect it appropriately in the tagging rule. Yeah, so that would be yeah, my answer to that question.
Thank you. Then a question either for John or for Mark or even for Richard. Looking at the timetable, the digital tagging will be required for financial year 2025, depending on amendments and adoption of the SFRTS by ESMA and the European Commission. And the single European repository, ESAP, the single access point, where all the reports will be stored, will not be available before 2027. So what can be done in the meanwhile? How can the data still be made available? Any volunteer?
Go for it.
Yes, that's a good question, right? The information will be created from this year in print format, and then from next year, from the year after that, in digital formats, and the documents will need to be consumed. But you can consider that some of the stakeholders will need to collect these reports anyway. The reports themselves will be made available at different national repositories. So each member state of the European Union has their own database for listed companies, and then another repository for non-listed companies. And we need to get that information and to then spread it to users. So we will have to collect this information. And most, for instance, our business is the added value we add to the data. So usually we redistribute the base files, right, the reports themselves for free. And I expect that there will also be some other initiatives to gather the reports and make them available. I know that there is already a site for the financial statements available from expert internationals, right? The filings.expert.org that does the same, right? Now there are some specific changes at some of the national repositories that must be met, but normally you should be able either to go to your national repository or to go to some public or private initiatives to do this.
Anything to add?
Mark's right. This information is sought by lots of people, so it's going to be available at a national level, whether it's pulled in by companies like Corporate Ratings or whether it's at the FXO or filings.expl.org environment, which was kind of an experiment and mostly aimed at regulators and issuers to help them understand what maybe they didn't get quite right. Maybe we'll have to improve it a bit and speed it up slightly so that all of this information is accessible in one place until ESAP arrives.
Wonderful. So we have completed our panel, and I really thank Mark, John, Stefan, and also Richard for the insights from the different perspectives. So with 1 minute of delay, at least one thing is working in this event today, which is the good contribution of the speakers and the timeliness. We have now the half an hour of interactive session where we can address the questions that we should have received. So, Richard, who is going to?
So first of all, the good news is we still have 30 minutes to go. So we're a little bit faster than anticipated, but still it's great that we have some time. So what I would propose, maybe, since you are anyway in the room and it seems we have lost the people from outside, that maybe you can give the chance to the people that are joined in the boardroom to raise a few questions, also to the panelists if they like. And then I have one last Slido poll, and maybe we can also look at a few questions in the Slido. Is this okay for you?
Absolutely, yes. So let's start with our guests in the room. If you have any observation or question for any one of us, don't be shy. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question on the.
You can tell us your name and company, and then you ask the question.
My name is Casper Spierings. I'm from the Cleversoft organization. We are developing a software to facilitate the XBRL generation. We see in the taxonomy that in some parts there's multi-dimensional tables, and normally you have 2 dimensions in the table, but we see that sometimes it goes up to 7 dimensions with countries, sectors. How should we address this? Should we try to accommodate all of it, or is it subject to the reporting company? What extent of dimensions is applicable?
This is an excellent. I can take it, and maybe you can add something, John. So this is an excellent question. I think because you actually mentioned it already. The issue is, or it's not an issue per se. It's just a matter of facts that the ESRS is providing those options. For instance, I think you are referring to the greenhouse gas emissions, which can be disaggregated by greenhouse gas type, by operating segment, by countries, by value chain, by financial operational control, and so on. So, of course, we could not simply omit all those disaggregations, because then it would have been an incomplete taxonomy. And the other option that we considered was to split it into smaller tables where we have only 1 or 2 dimensions, right? But this is again the open hypercube and closed hypercube issue. When you define it, when you define certain disaggregations and combinations of dimensions into smaller tables, then you prescribe actually which dimensions are combined. And this is not something that we can actually do. We don't know if a company would like to present the greenhouse gas category together with the value chain, for instance, right? And this is why we just want to keep it open. And in the end, it looks like a very large hypercube with a lot of dimension, but it must be very clear that it's not to be considered as one table. A company might still decide to display it in 1, 2, 3, 4 different tables, or present it in those different tables, right? So this is the flexibility that we get with the open hypercubes. And yeah, that's also something that when you look at it from a table perspective, so using the XBRL taxonomy as a template in this case won't work, right? Because there are too many dimensions on that single table. So for this specific case, you would need to have it like in the inline XBRL reporting, that the company can actually choose which of the disaggregations they would like to disclose, and then only show those, for instance. Yeah, this is how I would propose it. But John, maybe you want to add something.
Two quick points. I mean, just be grateful you're not part of the banking world, where I think we're 15 or 16 dimensions in some of their requirements. You know, banks are asked to disclose their exposures by any number of breakdowns. And yeah, there's some creativity you can do as a software vendor into the manner in which you present those questions to your users, but equally how you present those as tables or other mechanisms on the page. There's lots of flexibility there, and that's one of the nice things about sustainability reporting. You do have flexibility, but I just want to add one other point, which is CSRD is a directive, which actually means that it needs to be endorsed at national level by member states. And there's lots of different users. One of the users are member states. Member states in particular need statistical information about lots of things, including emissions data. So there will be requirements and may be obligations imposed at a national level today or tomorrow. I don't know whether you've been having those discussions, Chiara, but it is very likely. There was a meeting just a couple of weeks ago with official statistical bodies about the fact that they're going to need some of this information. And here we have high quality, well-specified digital and audited information. So why would those statistical bodies look anywhere else? So bear in mind, some of these breakdowns might be very important to certain specific types of users, and some of them might have a legislative stick.
Ignacio Boiso, President of the Eurofiling Foundation, and also volunteer here in EFRAG. The question is related to the success, the huge success of this event with more than 1,000 people attending online. I never see so big audience. And why? Very likely because sustainability will impact in 50,000 companies. That is 10 times more companies that in financial reporting, ISRS. So this is a huge effort across Europe. And the point is, according to the questions raised in this event, how to help the people, how to help the companies, how to help the consultants, for instance, in the topic of multidimensional issues. We have some organizations, XBRL International, XBRL Europe, some national organization, Eurofiling Foundation. But do you think that we could have some kind of forum specifically focused in the implementation of ISRS? Thank you.
I think it's something that we could discuss. It was premature before this moment, I think, to have that, or at least we haven't so far discussed this opportunity explicitly. But this is something that we could consider in the future. I don't think EFRAG can be directly active, but we can facilitate dialogue, and we could organize a few moments of interaction or be observer to any kind of forum that could be created. It is something that we could discuss. Yeah.
Maybe if I can contribute to that question coming from the financial side, really what people will look mostly at is ESMA's requirements. So maybe we should try to aim at our efforts at providing feedback to ESMA when they make their consultation about the RTS, and to also encourage them to make some consultation or some field work when they try to draft the RTS. In the end, in financial reporting, people really just look at these rules and only the rules that are made mandatory. So if I needed really to point the efforts, that would be toward helping ESMA draft technically precise rules, right? Because we are dealing with a technical format, to make sure that we don't have vague requirements and that companies know exactly what they need to do, so that auditors know exactly what they need to look at, and so that users need to know what to expect, and not just define best practices, but really to say what is really making the difference between what is needed to get the information in an understandable format, and then what is good practice, because most companies will focus on really what is necessary and required. So that is where we should focus our action, I think.
Hello, this is Jackie from ICBC Luxembourg. I would like to ask maybe the audience and the panelists, in case, is there any solution now in the market to convert between different standards? Our bank is reporting, our head office is reporting under TCFD, and we are doing the first GRI report. Now we are facing CSRD. Is there any magic software or anything already ready to use in the market, or for the future, we'd be ready to convert all different reports? Thank you.
Not that we've come across. There are any number of groups that are thinking about their own mapping mechanisms to be able to facilitate that. That's why we're very keen that there be, but we've seen some of those mappings and they're all slightly different. That's why we're very keen that there be at least a baseline mapping, but at an official level. But if people are aware of the magic, we'd be delighted to hear about it.
In order for the magic to happen, you need some work before, which is exactly what we are doing as standard setters in dialogue with bilateral meetings, which is extensive and continuing. Of course, we had to wait for the conclusion of the deliberation and legislative process from our side to have the final text on which to build the correspondence table, human readable, first of all, and that's what we are developing right now with the ISSB. There will be a joint map that will be produced. Once that is done and we are in the finalization phase, then the magic can start. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, a small compliment. I know we are talking a lot of ISSB, but for GRI, right, there was already a mapping table between the section of GRI and the list of data points that was released. And as was discussed before, the list of data points itself is pretty close to the taxonomy. So I don't know yet if some software providers have used that resource, but it's there, and some can already be achieved to help users map their GRI with the ESRS in technical terms.
Yes, hello. I'm Derek de Brandt from Agilonius. I want to first, so I'm an XBRL expert, by the way. I first want to congratulate Richard and the team on the work, because it's an extensive piece of work that you guys have made. I only have one question. Are there any plans in the future to translate this taxonomy in the European languages, given the intended footprint of the usage?
Richard, any view on the next steps, whether the RTS?
Yes. So IFRAC has no plans to translate the XBRL taxonomy, but I know that Eduardo from ESMA mentioned that they might translate the ESEF RTS again, like they also did for the financial reporting, including all the labels of the elements into all EU languages. And they might decide then to also incorporate that into the taxonomy. So there could be a translation provided implicitly or indirectly through the ESEF RTS translation. Yeah, but I don't know if it will be like an official translation or not. I think it's quite similar situation with the IFRS accounting taxonomy. I can recommend to still sticking to the English text, of course. Yeah. And thank you very much. Yeah.
Any other comment or question? Not from the room, Richard. Do we have any question online that we want to take?
Yes. We have a few questions online. So first of all, the slides will be provided to you. Don't worry, even a recording, I guess. Which will be the approach for tagging of the DR's data points, which will not be material for a company? This is an interesting question. We will have we are proposing a mechanism to tag data points that are not material, if it is required actually to do so, in our explanatory note. This is not exactly a tagging per se of the taxonomy itself, so it's nothing that we prepare in the taxonomy. This is really something that need to be, for instance, part of the tagging rule. And I think at least for the EU data point, the ESRS is quite clear that this needs to be done, right? Because the ESRS text says that those data points shall be disclosed even if they are not material. So the fact that they are not material shall be disclosed, right? And this could be done by using an XSE nil attribute on the fact, which is saying nothing else than not in list or not there, right? So it's an explicit tag that is saying it's not being disclosed. However, we are also discussing with John Turner, and maybe you can confirm if this approach is working or if there might be other technical solution for tagging those non-material data points. Interestingly, we came across a real report, Ørsted, from the Danish company Ørsted, which has exactly done this in their, I mean, not the digital tagging, but they have ESRS in reference disclosures in the annual report 2023, and they have a list of not material data points on page 160, I guess. So if somebody is interested in looking at that, I can recommend looking at this report. And indeed, it would be possible to take those data points as not material then digitally. So, John, do you want to add something?
No, I think that, well, there's the question about how you identify those mandatory disclosures which you have determined as not material to your company. I mean, what you propose seems like a sensible approach. I know that's something that SIG is discussing, so that may be that there's a new best practice about that in due course, but it looks pretty good to us at present. There are plenty of other good questions, though. Happy to chime in on some of those if you like.
Great. Let's go with the next one. Is the tagging only required for the sustainability ESG report or the whole management report? This is, of course, an interesting question. We cannot answer that one as, again, we are not ESMA. We are not in the remit of defining the tagging rule. Yeah, do you have any answer to that one, Chiara, other than my response?
No, I think we can. No, I would stick to your response for the time being. Yes.
Okay.
Here's a non-official view that it does seem clear that the approach that's going to be taken within CSRD will be similar to that taken in some other jurisdictions, including the United States, where the sustainability materials need to be in the management commentary, or MD&A in the US context. And that's sections of the report that have previously not been tagged, but we've not heard about requirements to tag other aspects of management commentary. It's just this special part defined by ESRS.
And just one note from my side as well. Keep in mind that the Article 8 disclosures will most likely be also needed to be tagged, right? So the Article 8 disclosures, which are already being disclosed as of today by many companies, we have prepared that taxonomy as well for the European Commission. So I think it's quite likely that the tagging will be required as well. But Andrea, I think you also wanted to add something? No, okay.
It was just to say that Article 8 is part of the sustainability statement and will be marked up the taxonomy. Of course, yes.
Richard, you didn't see it. There was a question in the room about the name of the company that has already done an ESRS disclosure. I think it's Orsted, right? Could you spell it for the room?
Yes, Orsted, O-R-S-T-E-D, right? And it's the annual report 3, and they have disclosed with reference to ESRS, I think even a number of topics. Yeah. There is another question actually related to Patrick de Combourg. He was talking about disaggregation level of tagging. Who is going to confirm that the level of aggregation or disaggregation is correct? The auditors? Well, first of all, the question is if it's, I mean, the question is if the tagging is probably being audited or not. If this is the question, Andrea, do you want to react?
Well,
no, yes, maybe Chiara, you want to react. Please, go ahead.
I think what Patrick was referring to is
on the design, I would say.
yeah, exactly. So in the tagging, the approach has been to reflect as much as possible the separation of data point and therefore disaggregation that was adopted in the standard setting, so in the drafting of the standards themselves. So exceptions have been made, but they are really very, very few for when tagging is not made on a one-to-one basis with the data points that are separated in Roman in A, B, C, and then Roman in 1, 2, or 3. So granularity has been assessed by the standard setter in drafting the standards as reflected in the delegated act. There's nobody that is going to question that separation for the delegated act. Before the post-implementation review that will take place in 3 years' time from now and could lead to new standard setting and amendment of the delegated act, but it's a future opportunity. This is not said that we are going to change. What the taxonomy is doing is simply reflecting that without judgment, except if we really spot that there was a problem in the text. But I think, Richard, we have done very limited exceptions, and you can confirm that. The ESMA will define the tagging rules. So starting from the recommendation of EFRAG, they may deviate from what we have suggested or not. Ultimately, the rules that will have to be applied are those defined by ESMA. So the auditor will have to scrutinize whether the tagging according to the RTS have been properly made. If for some reasons that Esma will explain, they will deviate from what EFRAG has proposed in our final document to the Commission, then they will have differences in the RTS, but what will count at the end is the RTS, because EFRAG is not the rule maker, we are an advisor.
Thank you, Chiara. Maybe just another one. As soon as ESRS will be embedded in the ESEF, is it fair to assume that there will not exist a true standalone ESRS report? Financial and ESG will be merged? Is a question mark. Do you want to answer, Chiara? Maybe I can add from a digital perspective.
Can you repeat the question, Richard?
So do you think there will be a merged financial and ESG report, or will there be also standalone ESRS reports?
Well, there is no standalone ESRS report because the ESRS report is a chapter of the management report, and the management report accompanies the financial statements. So the two things are to be seen together. If the question is hinting to the integrated reporting, that's a different story. The European Commission and then with the delegated act, also the Parliament, they have made a conscious choice to locate the ESRS sustainability statement in one chapter or separate section of the management report, which means that disseminating the sustainability information, merging them with the financial reporting information is not what is allowed. It is allowed to use incorporation by reference. So in the ESRS sustainability statement, you can make reference to a certain list, to a certain documents that are listed in ESRS 1. So what may happen is that the integrated report may still have the form of an executive summary where the company tells an integrated story, putting together the strategy and the key highlights of what happened from both financial and sustainability point of view all together. But that will be in a section of the management report, to which the sustainability statement, ESRS, will make reference, so incorporate by reference that part. But there are conditions for the incorporation by reference. In particular, it should not impair the readability and understandability of the ESRS report. So in other terms, you cannot have an ESRS report that is a simple mere list of cross references. That will not be compliant with the standards. It needs to be a real report. So that is a bit a limit to, or a feature for integrated reporting now in ESRS.
And just adding from a deep, go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
In terms of timing, it's also important that the two are produced at the same time and that they can be signed by the auditors, because consistency is also a key of the ESRS, right? And some of the metrics rely on financial information that needs to be the same as, or consistent with the one that can be found in the financial statement. So that can be only signed if the financial statement is also ready and accessible, right? So, and same way in the opposite, right? The financial statement will need to be consistent with the risks, for instance, that are disclosed in the sustainability statement.
Thank you, Mark. And just to add from a technical perspective, I think it's of course ESMA's decision, but it will definitely make sense to have both reports, financial reports and ESRS reports in one report package. Technical, this is a technical term for the XBRL document, right? Good. Maybe one last question, the very last question for today, for John. Extinguishable enumerations is used extensively. Is it a recommendation from XII that tags for iXBRL are designed with EE, so preparers only can tag the info in hidden.
So that's not an official piece of guidance from XBRL International at the moment, but there is work going on to produce some guidance and potentially some alternative options for you to consider. When we think about the fact that these materials won't need to be prepared until Q1 26, I think there is plenty of time for that to be developed, argued about, tested and implemented. It's a pretty small thing. But thanks for the question.
Thank you. And maybe let me add that it's of course also possible to tag the extendable enumeration in a non-hidden section of the inline document. It will just look a little bit ugly, right? Because the technical name would need to appear on the face of the human readable report. But it's definitely a valid option. Yeah. So it's not that the hidden is actually needed. Yeah? It's just a little bit more convenient from my point of view. Good. I think that's it. We have 1 minute. No, actually on time, right, Chiara?
Absolutely. So thanks a lot to all of you, well, the speakers, the team, of course, for the hard work and the contribution, all of you for coming here in this full room. All those attended online, apologies again for this very unusual, I need to say, incident that we had. We will follow up sending the slides and the link to the recording. And looking forward for your contribution to our consultation. So thanks a lot, to be continued.